going to start this discussion. We're going to introduce every person for the audience, so please go ahead.
My name is Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. I'm a documentary filmmaker from Pakistan.
Rafael Yuste, soy médico neurobiólogo, es de España y de Estados Unidos, y tengo como dos lados de mi trabajo. Por un lado, intento estudiar el cerebro de los mamíferos y por otro lado también estoy involucrado en un poco activismo científico para realizar proyectos comunes de larga escala como el proyecto del cerebro. I'm sorry, we're talking in English. I'm just so confused here.
Lost in translation.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I think we've been taped, so it's better if we speak in English. So Rafael Yuste from Spain, US, neuroscience. I wear two hats. One, I'm a researcher trying to understand how the brain works. My other hat is science activism, focused on large-scale projects like the US and International Brain Initiative, and now trying to launch an ethical project to provide ethical guidelines for neuroscience and artificial intelligence.
Gabriel, please.
My name is Gabriel Ripstein. I am an alumni of this school. I am an economist, but then I transformed my path and became a filmmaker. I'm a writer and a director.
Introduce me. I am José Carrillo. I am a neurosurgeon and a physician. My main point of surgeon are stereotactic and functional neurosurgeon. That means the use of electrodes in the brain and spinal cord to amelioration of some of pain and other symptoms like tremor or rigidity in some patients. So this is the main thing to say. I'm going to ask of our colleagues about what is your opinion of this award that you received. Please go ahead, Rafa or Sharmeen.
So you would wonder what is a scientist and a documentary filmmaker doing next to each other in a panel. What do we have in common? And apparently we have nothing in common, but actually we're here to tell you that we have a lot in common, that what we do in science and in the arts is at the end of the day very similar. There are threads that run through our work, and the more we talk to each other, the more we identify with each other as two sides of the same profession. So there's examples, we can discuss them later in this panel, but yeah, but that's sort of the message I wanted to provide to you today.
As a filmmaker, I'm delighted that I am receiving an award that has nothing to do with my filmmaking, but everything to do with what I've used my films for. For a long time now, I believe that I wear two hats. One is of a filmmaker, and one is of using the film to create good in the world. How can the stories and the people that I make films about change the way people look at issues? How can they have empathy with the characters? How can they be sitting here in Mexico City and look at a film about a Filipino woman and feel something for her? What is it that I can do to bridge the two worlds so that at the end of the day we begin to look at each other as simply human beings and strip away all of the labels that we put on artificially on one another? And so for me it's a great honor to be getting this award, and it gives me the impetus to continue to do the kind of work that I do, knowing that someone will always have my back, and knowing that the films that I create and the messaging that I'm putting out there will hopefully change the minds of the next generation.
If I can add to that, this is exactly why we're here, because in our profession we decided to take the route of using our profession, which in principle is neutral. You can use science or filmmaking or arts for good or for bad, and we decided to take this towards causes to help humanity in causes that are of great social importance. So that's actually the reason that we're here, and that's honoring the vision of the Thalberg Foundation, who decides to put people like us together in the same award because they see that what's important is the end point where we want to get to.
Do you want to say something?
I mean, I have some specific questions for you, Sharmeen, which have to do obviously with the reason why you have received this award, and which has to do with the whole path that your career has followed. And essentially, as an artist who has achieved a very important level of visibility, has there been any change in the way that you approach your material or your subject matter, given that you now have that possibility of your work reaching a very big audience?
Was it Superman who said that with great something comes great responsibility?
Spider-Man. It was
Spider-Man.
great power comes great responsibility.
My superhero is a little confused. But yeah, so just like that, I feel like I've been given a responsibility. You know, I feel very fortunate that I've had the kind of career that I've had, but I need to be very responsible now with the kind of films that I make. So I have to think about the issues that confront all of us and the issues that people are not talking about. If you look at my body of work, I always talk about issues that people are not looking at. I want to continue to do that because I think that's very important and that's something that I hold dear to me. But I think that now I think more and more, my film is just one component of something that is a larger journey. I create the film, but then what happens with the film? Who watches the film? Where does it go? Does it impact anything on a grassroots level? Does it impact anything on a legislation level? What is the end goal? For me, creating a film is no longer the end goal. The end goal is far bigger than the film now. And I think that I've been very fortunate to have been given that platform to do so. And I want to continue to be able to do that. You know, I get hundreds of people write to me and my film company every year, pitching us ideas from their communities around the world. Please do a film about this, please do a film about this. We sift through all of that to come up with a list of films we think are important, a list of topics we think are important. And I think now, because of the platform that I have, I'm willing to take even greater risks than I was before, because I'm hoping that now that I have some level of protection, however naive that may be of thinking, but that I have some level of protection so I can go after, you know, the most corrupt. I can go after the ones that are creating the ruckus in the world. So I think it's emboldened me to do a lot more than I was doing initially.
Actually, if I can follow on this, so you're watching us here as you got an award, these guys are successful, but what you don't see is that all the struggle and the battles that we have in order to try to push forward these ideas. So in her case, it's admirable from the time that she's 17, how she's had enormous opposition all the way to today. So that's why this award sends the message that, hey, someone cares, someone in the world really cares about this type of work, and gives you like a pat in the back seat, here, go forward. In my case, it's exactly the same thing. Now, when I first proposed the idea that we have to understand the brain by building methods to record the activity of every neuron in the brain, many of my colleagues said, no, it's impossible, you cannot do it, you're just silly here. Or it will cost too much money, or you won't know what to do with the data, no? And I was in a great minority, and I was actually intellectually abused by my field, no? So I think it's maybe the one message we could transfer to you is that you need to, first of all, not to listen to what people say, just have your courage and determination to continue on the same path, and work for a higher audience than the immediate feedback that you get from your environment, because I mean, that's, you have to keep your eye at the end, no? What is it that you're aiming to do, no? So we could fill this hour with stories of how they try to block our work, and that's something that you should keep in mind. That's something that binds us together.
Maybe the most important thing that you express is ethics. I think for both of your work are the ethics. Could you explain more about that? What is the ethics for you, Sharmeen? What is the ethics for you, Rafael? Please.
Ethics for me?
Yes, yes.
My ethics is that a long time ago, I think when I was 10 years old, I was going to school, and Karachi is a bustling city of 20 million people. So the car was going through, and it stopped at a traffic light. And I looked out of the window. I was wearing my school uniform, which was a gray skirt and a white shirt. And I looked out of the window, and I saw a girl. She was about 10 years old, and her nose was pressed against the car window, and her hand was stretched out. And she was begging, and she was barefoot. And I remember thinking to myself, why is this girl not in school? Why am I going to school? And I came home and I asked my mother, and she said, well, that's just the way the world is. Some people have opportunities and other people don't. And later on in my life, I realized that someone tossed a coin and it landed on a side that was favorable to me, that I ended up, like so many of you here, born in a family that could afford us education, could send us to school, gave us the ability to fly, gave us the ability to follow our dreams. But that's not always the case for so many other people. So who advocates for them? What if I had been born on that side of, what if the coin had fallen on the other side? Who would advocate for me? And that's what keeps me going, thinking that it's simply the luck of the draw that we are who we are. And we could have just as easily been someone else. And that we must continue to fight and voice for all of those whose coins landed on the side that didn't give them an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sharmeen. Please, Rafael.
So I was trained in medicine. I'm a doctor. And the purpose of medicine is to help people. So it's an altruistic profession. So for me, ethics is what we're supposed to do. And when I was doing my internship, I had to work with, in the psychiatry wards with paranoid schizophrenic patients. And these guys are super smart, and they something wrong in their heads that they have a devastating behavior towards themselves and the communities. So they have to be essentially incarcerated. We had to interview them with bodyguards. No? And when I was interviewing one of these people, I said, God, I mean, if I work as a doctor, I may be able to help one person or two or three, no? But we have to understand how the brain works in order to help all these other, all these schizophrenics, and not just schizophrenics, people that suffer from mental or neurological diseases. And I'm sure every one of you here knows in your family or in friends, people that suffer these diseases, and you know that there's no cure. So I thought, well, you know what? If I really want to help people, maybe instead of being a doctor, I should just go down and help as a scientist, because if we understand the system, instead of helping one or two people, we can help millions of people. No? So that's why I became involved in neuroscience, and I've been doing neuroscience. And I represent a group of scientists like me that extend through space and time. We're part of a network of people that are working for mankind to try to help mankind by providing knowledge that can then help us cure these diseases. No? So at some point, I got involved in these large-scale projects because I thought, well, if we really need to help understand the brain, we have to do it better than we're doing it. And as a consequence of that, I started to notice that these technologies that we're developing, combined with what's happening in artificial intelligence, are going to have a massive impact in society. So it's the same backbone of a doctor trying to help people. Say, well, you know what, we have to get involved in this because otherwise, instead of helping people, we're going to hurt people. And that's when I started working on these issues of proposing changes to the human rights, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so that these new technologies and artificial intelligence are integrated in a way that can help people. So as I was telling you earlier, we had to fight a lot of naysayers to this day who telling us, you cannot do that, it's impossible, or who are you, by the way, or to try to dream like this. No, I mean, it's, and it's those types of criticism that make us try to work harder. Yeah.
Sharmeen, another question for you. Art and culture have been proven to be a very powerful tool to bring on social change. However, in many countries, Mexico being one of them, the creation of art and culture is very dependent on the support of government, of government financing. And there is a constant threat, given that this is a country that has so many necessities, as many other third world countries. There is a constant threat to that support, to that funding, to that impulse that the government provides. From your standpoint, how do we raise the awareness of art and culture as that tool that needs to be fostered just as much as many other fields in a country that has many necessities? How do we increase the visibility and therefore reduce that threat of loss of resources in countries such as ours?
I mean, my country, the state patronage of arts, culture, film is non-existent. Long before I was born, apparently, my parents and grandparents tell me that the state played an active role in the cultivation of film and art and culture and dance, but we had a Islamization of the country with a brutal dictator who thought that none of this mattered, and he systematically basically tried to change our art, culture, and delete it from our society. Long after he was gone, we are still struggling to reclaim some of what we have lost. In 2003, I was making a film in Peshawar, and a musician told me something that has always stayed with me. He said that if we don't protect our culture and our art, future generations will stone our graves. And it's such a poignant thing to think about, and how important art and culture is to us. And so now we've decided, and I think it's important for there to be a way for the private sector, for artists to leverage that, as well as keep pushing the government to do that. So last year, I set up a museum in Pakistan, in the city of Lahore, Pakistan's first digital interactive museum of national history, which uses art, culture, and kind of pushes the envelope. And we did it with partnership with the government by telling the government how important it was to have a national history museum and to protect our culture. And we used something, a clever, I would say, way of doing it is to talk to them about the impression that the outside world has of the country and its people. And when foreign delegations come through, which are the museums we will take them to? What is the art that we will show them? What is the culture that we will introduce them to? And for them to see that art and culture is not something expendable, but something to take pride in. We've also started to push a number of banks, multinationals, to step in to the void. So to support biennales, for example, for artists, to support film festivals. And now, slowly, the government, after seeing the success of so many of these things, have begun to step in. But we all know that in tumultuous times, art and culture are the first things that get cut because they are meant to be expendable. But I think that as long as artists continue to find ways to create, if you look at countries where you have enormous censorship, where you have very little state patronage like Iran and a number of other countries, you have some incredible art coming out of it because artists are just so resilient. They will find a way to create. You can't stop artists from creating. They will find a way to create. But I think that now more than ever, government is one part of the larger conglomerate of of institutions that need to step in?
Well, do you think for you that the science and the art became a best humanity? What is your opinion about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I am biased. So I disclose this. So the way I look at history is that there are people in the front that are pulling everyone behind, and these are the artists and the scientists and engineers, because they're opening new ways of thinking. And they're doing that, as Sharmeen mentioned, with their creativity. We're essentially, our job is to imagine things that no one has seen before, or look at the same things that everyone has seen in a different way. And by doing that, we expand the mental world, the horizon of humanity. And very often, these artists or scientists, they work in their own, and no one knows what they're doing, and they die, and they suffer during their lives. They don't get paid or whatever. And then comes the next wave, in which that knowledge or that ways of thinking trickles to the population. And that happens through other professions, and that's when also sometimes it becomes embedded in the economy in terms of science. The discoveries of the scientists and the engineers lead to new industries. I don't have to tell you about this. Everything that we have in the world is a result of some early work by a scientist or an engineer. And then society gets moved forward in the future when these new ways of thinking get incorporated. And when that happens, society changes, there are changes in the laws, and we call that progress. So I think that's part of the reason we're here, is because we represent these groups of people that are like the scouts of society that are ahead, and it's critical, I think. So going back to this question, for governments and institutions, it's fundamental that they invest in artists and scientists, because they are our guarantee for our future. That's the future of the societies there, and this is also a responsibility. I would mention that it's not just depends on the government, so it's not something that you, just like I was saying earlier with this Basque tradition of the auzolan. So if the government doesn't do it, don't just sit there and complain. You do something about it. You can either wait for things to happen, or you can just make things happen, and you get together in groups or in social, the spirit of social groups that are independent of the government, that can also play a fundamental role in the future of society.
I think that artists and scientists all take risks. They all push the envelope. Scientists are always looking for their new discovery of pushing humankind forward, and and I think that artists are doing the same, is getting society to think about things that they don't want to think about, confront things, or putting something up there that people watch or look at or absorb and rethink about their lives. So I think that as scientists and artists, we are both risk takers, and I think that's what is common in both of us.
And this is something where every one of you can actually contribute to this common goal, because again, even if you're not involved in a government or in a department of ITAM and trying to make decisions, even as individual citizens, you can provide support for those people in the society that are willing to use their lives for the common good by taking risks, by pushing ahead in this direction. So I think if people like us get support from the society, I think this would be something that would benefit the society as a whole. Again, we think that we are obviously biased, because that's what we do, but in a way we're trying to build a future.
I think that I take a lot of risks because I have people, ordinary people who support that, who speak up for me, speak up for my work, who give me a layer of protection. And I think that that's really important. I think artists can only survive if they have people who help them, who give them the space and form sometimes a protective boundary around them when they have a lot of backlash. Because we all know that artists around the world are not safe. I mean, you know, depending on what kind of artist you are right now and which country you live in, and what kind of art you create. But if you create provocative art that ruffles the feathers of those in power, or you know, there will be backlash. You know, your photographers are jailed, artists are jailed routinely around the world. Filmmakers have their licenses revoked. They're thrown into prison all the time.
I also, I just thought of, when I heard you talking about how you take a risk and how it all starts, I think also of that, I mean, why do I take risks? So part of it is because I have a very strong support from my family. You know, my mother thinks that whatever I do is perfect, so and I have that's sort of the roots from which I draw the strength. And my other roots are also my culture. So I come from Spain, and you know people from Spain, and this is the same people that run the bulls, no? So it's not the kind of people that are wishy-washy, yeah, I think I'm, to the contrary, we're obstinate to the point of foolishness. No, very often there's some way to describe foolishness going into battle, which you cannot even translate into English. So I think that cultural backbone has definitely helped me in terms of pushing these types of agendas through the opposition of most of my peers and through the opposition of the hierarchies.
Sharmeen, you're a journalist and also an artist. Is there a divide? Is there a line between those two sides of you? When you approach a project, is there one of those sides that is sort of the guiding force? Does it vary from one project to the other, or are they just meshed together?
I'll always be a journalist, because I think that that's at the core of who I am, is someone who investigates, who probes, who keeps, you know, pushing, asking, doing all of that. The artist in me is the one that wants to make the journalism palatable to everyone. Because sometimes the issues that I'm talking about, people don't want to see. You don't want to see a disfigured woman who's had acid thrown on her face on a Saturday night when you flip through the television channels. You don't want to watch that. You already see enough of reality. So the journalist side of me is like, this is important to show. And the artist side of me is like, let's dress it up so everybody wants to watch it. So I think there's always, they go in tandem with each other. I think the journalist side in me pushes the narrative through, and it's like baking. You bake a cake and then you dress it up beautifully, but at the center of it, it's the cake that you're eating, and that's what I do, I feel. So the journalism in me will always continue, but I tend to now not call myself a journalist too much, because, you know, the state of the world of journalists is really terrible. So I'd much rather be an artist or a filmmaker to the government and to everyone else than be a journalist, because even though to me, myself and I am a journalist.
Real quick, I know most of your work is non-fiction, documentary, but you've also delved into fiction. Is there a different mindset when you approach a project that is fiction versus your documentary work?
Yeah, the fiction that I create is for children, because I always believe that all of us have a child in us, and that the world has sort of dimmed that down. So the only fiction I make is for children. I create animations for children. I tell stories for children, because I want children to be taken to another world. I want them to experience joy, but I also want them to see reality through characters that they can identify with. I don't think I'll ever do fiction for adults. I think that I'll stick to storytelling for children. And I get away with saying so much when I just tell children through the censor board, because it's cartoons and it's children, so it flies over the censor board. So I get to talk about very difficult issues. You know, I talk about women and rights, and I talk about the hidden powers that women have in them and how they can make the world a greater place, and I talk about corruption and I talk about all these things, but then a cartoon character is doing all the talking. So it's a clever way of creating fiction and also talking about the issues that I hold dear to me.
Actually, something that you said resonates very strongly with me. And I also firmly believe that at the heart of every scientist it's a child. So the reason why scientists and artists are creative is because in a way we're little like these fresh minds that children have that question things, and through this keeping alive that flame of insatisfaction and inquiry is what makes us think of new things or push forward the boundaries. So if you know a scientist and you find out very often funny situation that they're a little bit like children, and it's like this child that is constantly asking questions, and the father said, that's enough, no more questions, and why is the sky blue, or what happened here? And I would encourage you to keep that flame alive, either in yourselves or with the people you interact with, because it's this childish, fresh mind is what we need in humanity to try to solve all these enormous problems that seem to be so catastrophically looming above us.
Thank you very much. Well, we're talking about, in front of you, you are students of economy and administration, something like that. The next question I'm going to talk about is about your financial sources. Please, could you tell where is your sources?
Yes, why don't you?
For each one. Yes, please.
So as a researcher, the way we found our work is by writing grants. We apply and compete for funding, which is either public or private from entities. In the US, it's either federal agencies or private foundations, like the Thalberg for the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, for example, who's sponsoring this prize, and whom we should also thank. And then there's juries of peers, so these are people like you that most of the time are anonymous, so you don't know who they are, and they get all these grants to review, and they choose the best ones, and the best ones get funded. Now, in the US right now, the funding for science is very competitive. So just to give you some numbers so that you appreciate, the main funder of the type of work that I do, of biomedical research, is the National Institutes of Health, and they fund about 10% of all the grants that they receive. So that means that for every 10 grants, there's one lucky one. So as a consequence of that, we spend, unfortunately, a lot of time writing grants to keep this research going. But it's unfortunate because that time could be spent doing actually the research and trying to really work for mankind and for humankind in a more effective way. That's how it happens in most of the world. So it's through these grant applications, and these grants are normally for 3 to 5 years. So you have to spend maybe at least 20% of my time just doing this grant fundraising.
So I have more Oscars than Leonardo DiCaprio, but I have 0.0000000.01% of the money he has. So as a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, I struggle to make ends meet when it comes to funding for the films, because as you said, we also rely on grants. We rely on either multinationals grants or television companies to give us the money that they do. And in the world where everyone is a filmmaker, like everyone's a photographer, thanks to your telephone, that there are so many filmmakers now that the competition is intense. You know, I feel very lucky that I'm slightly ahead of the curve because I started when I was 17. So I'm slightly ahead of the curve when it comes to it, but it's a struggle. It is a struggle. Yeah, I mean, you won't become a millionaire if you become a filmmaker, but you'll sleep well at night.
Is it possible to know what you're working on right now?
I'm working on a series about how fundamentalists control women around the world. Just, you know, casual. In 5 different countries. We're working in Brazil, in Kenya, in the United States, in Georgia, the country, and in Pakistan. So the series will be out on International Women's Day in 2019.
I think it's the time to the question of the public. If you want to make some question, please go ahead. Please, we have a microphone. Please. Okay, thank you very much.
You can ask questions in Spanish also, and then we'll...
Oh, that's fine, thanks. So my name is Enrique, I study economics, and my question for both of you is, sometimes with your work, it seems like the biggest dangers and the biggest troubles are from outside the world, but you've also got very dangerous things inside, like fear and all the things you've spoken about. So how do you deal with those things? Like, you've got, you gotta know how to handle yourself before you take action. So, for example, Sharmeen, and of course you too, how do you deal with that, with all those emotions and the balance? I think that both of you have a great balance between a huge compassion for the world, a great courage, and also a lot of strength. So, what is your take on this?
So there are 2 things. One is that when you're working in a difficult environment, obviously there's an impact that you have personally. You spend days and nights living with people who you're filming, and they're living through a war zone, or they're living through all of these things. So it impacts you physically and emotionally as well, because you know you'll film them, but you have the ability to leave. You know, and they don't, because that's their life. So that's something that you have to figure out the way to switch off when you leave, because otherwise it has a way of eating at you. The fear, I think, because there's many times we take a lot of risks to tell the stories that we do. So it's difficult to deal with that, to deal when you're far from the crowd, when the lights are off, when you're alone. Sometimes you think about the fear, you think about whether your life is at risk, whether the work that you're doing, how other people are going to react to it, whether it's going to have a backlash. And one thing that I've done to protect myself is I've taken myself completely off social media. So I'm not on social media. All my accounts are operated by my work people. So I don't listen to half the stuff that's thrown at me, because I think about my work and what I need to do to carry on. And I think that for many people today who take big risks, a lot of fear comes from online and what happens online, especially women, because they get hate thrown at them, they get trolled, they get a lot of visceral attacks against them, especially women who have a voice and who don't hesitate to speak out. So I've thought that since I've done that, I'm a much calmer and saner person.
Actually, if I can just follow up on that. So I also have suffered and take risk, although they're not of the caliber of the physical threats that you've heard about, and also that our African clergy have bitterly suffered in their own lives and the lives of their families with people being assassinated. So I have to tell you, these are admirable people you have here in front of you. So my type of risk are more professional risk, intellectual risk, and as you say brilliantly, they're coming both from the outside and also from the inside. I'm questioning myself all the time whether did I take the right action? Was I right? What should I do? So sometimes the people that know me say that I'm my worst critic and they have to protect me from myself. But once I take a decision, then the way I deal with the risk outside is, again, going back to my Spanish roots. I tend to think that if everyone tells me that I'm doing something wrong, I tend to think that everyone else is wrong, that it's their problem. So that sort of has helped me in the past. I sort of feel happy with myself because, hey, everyone else is wrong. Isn't that good? Yeah.
Thanks. My name is Carlos Lara. First, an observation. It's interesting that you came and talk us about culture and important that art is in these days. I think we have a little lack of identity in our country. And I came here with my mom. And thanks my mom, I speak the little English that I speak. And then there's not a translator machine from English to Spanish. And well, that's really funny, no? My specific question is, there's a lot of movements in Mexico. It has been movement of 68 or nearby the Movimiento 132 from a university, just like this one. And it has a lot of passion and effort on it, and a lot of artists and a lot of different kind of way thinking in the movements, and then the movements are they don't land in something. How can this be possible? How can we land these movements in some things? I don't know, think tanks or some things that can work, especially in places, in countries like Mexico, that we have this enormous difference between classes. This would be my question. En español rápidamente nada más comentaba al principio que me hubiera gustado tener traductores para... Vengo con mi mamá y me hubiera encantado que no le tuviera que traducir ahí las cosas a español, ¿no? Y cómo estos movimientos sociales de juventud y de jóvenes podrían aterrizarse a algo que verdaderamente fueran productivos y ser, si bien no la contra del gobierno, trabajar junto con el gobierno, pero para pelear por esos intereses por los que nacieron. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for your question, and apologize to your mother in the name of all of us. We were just by chance, right before we came, talking about the 68 movement and what happened here, and the fact that it may or may not have been properly assimilated and associated by the society, by the governments in a historical memory moment. No? And actually, Gabriel and I were just discussing the importance of civil society in this. So again, going back to this metaphor of the Auzolan groups in the Basque Country and Navarra, if the government doesn't do it, that doesn't mean that it cannot be done. So there are associations that you can form as a civil society group and take responsibility to look back at the past and try to digest the past, as bitter and as difficult it is, so that it actually can heal and can lead to a new state in the society where these things have actually, instead of breaking us apart, have united. And you have the wonderful example of the African clergy here, which with their own lives are risking the life of themselves and their families to seam together these bitter disputes in the society. And they also didn't wait for the government to do this for them. No, they did it themselves. So maybe one message is to strengthen the civil society in Mexico so that it's less dependent on this paternalistic view of the world where, oh, the government has to do this and the government has to take care of this, what happened here in 68, or the lack of accountability for the people that were responsible. No?
I mean, in terms of 1968, I just did a series that touches on that, a political thriller. Again, as we were discussing back there, the 1968 movement, it's been 50 years and it's still an open wound. There hasn't been a sense of closure because there wasn't ever a clear sense of responsibility. Now, in terms of movements like 132, I guess that the context that we live in makes these movements rise so rapidly, specifically because of social media. Not that that's the only reason why, but the power of social media makes these things happen and be created and gain visibility and magnitude really quickly. I guess the downside of it is that they also fade very quickly. Everything happens very fast now. Online movements rise and they disappear quickly. So again, I don't have the response of how do you turn those movements which might surge and expand so quickly online and translate into people in the streets or people raising their voices. What happens afterwards? That, again, I have no clear response for that because it's very complex. But at least, again, the evidence that we have for the last, I don't know, maybe 6 years since 132 is that there is a capacity to convoke and to move things. It's just a question of them not fading quickly until the next hashtag, whatever, comes along.
In my country, in 1947, there was a traumatic experience when the country became independent and millions of people moved from one part, from India into Pakistan. And nobody ever talked about that trauma. Nobody ever talked about what happened to those people when they moved. No one talked about the families they left behind, the impact of the violence on them. And we started an oral history project to record eyewitnesses, to record people who were there. And it's very cathartic to hear, to heal, to hear what people saw and witnessed at that time. It also becomes a repository for the next generation who were never there, who were not around at that time. And perhaps, in my country at least, a lot of history is erased all the time. So the oral history provides us with a strong basis to know that this was the citizens' history. This is what they witnessed, this is what they were part of. So that's something that I can offer as something that can be done. But also I think that the global phenomena, I also come from a class-based society where there is a very big stratification between the rich and the poor, and the internet, however, has brought all of that together because the internet now allows you to talk to anybody. It could be somebody who cleans the floor in your house, and he or she has access to the internet, as do you. And you can communicate with them on that. You might not necessarily have a conversation with them, when you're passing through because of the stratification of society. And so I think that the internet has allowed a level playing field for people to converse with each other. I know we don't always converse. We most often shout at each other now. But it does provide a platform to converse. And I think that movements are building based around that. And it'll take some time. But I find hope in the fact that I can now communicate with someone who sits across my country, who might not think like me, who might not have the same experience as me, but I can learn to understand where he or she comes from, what their reality is. Before, I couldn't do that because there was no way for me to connect. And I think we're laying the foundation for a grand movement that will probably come in all of our countries in our lifetime.
Hi, my name is Ana from Teach for Mexico. Thank you for this panel. It was very inspiring. I wanted to ask about the motivation that you give to others in your everyday life, apart from the big events like this one that can be limiting for the public. What do you do in your everyday, Sharmeen, what do you do in your everyday, Rafael, to inspire others to do disruptive projects, to motivate them to do what you're doing?
So, as part of my job, I ran a laboratory with 15 people, and these are people that are in training, either undergraduates, well, high school students, undergraduates, graduate students, or postdocs, and I work with them all the time. In fact, my desk is in the lab next to the desks of the other people. And one way to motivate them, I start working at 7:30 a.m. every morning, and I'm there just like one more. I don't have a secretary. I pick up my own phone, and I think that's you motivate with the daily work, day after day, just your humble fashion, and people around you, they say, God, I mean, look at this guy. He could be in his office smoking a cigar, and he's here at 7:30 in the morning. So the next morning, I see the young person who just started working hard, and I think a lot of what we do is it's essentially to transmit to the next generations that torch that we carry, and that as scientists, I got that torch from someone else. No? And my mentor in England once told me that he lives for the moment when he's talking to a 14-year-old and he sees a spark in his or her eyes of inspiration because of a conversation they had about science. So at that point, you know that that person has the torch or the fire. No? And that's how, again, we are part of a network that doesn't belong to any country. We work in history throughout time and through space, and we essentially light each other's torch.
I like spending time with young people, so I speak a lot to students in government schools, in colleges, in smaller settings. My main kind of inspiration to them is that follow your dreams. I did it from where I come from, and you can do it from where you come from. And often it turns into a system where they're always telling me, well, my father's not going to let me do this, my mother's not going to let me do this, our culture doesn't allow that. And I often show them films about young women who come from similar backgrounds, but who've been able to break through. They might have come from their city or their neighborhood or their socioeconomic background. So that's what I think I do all the time. That keeps me also grounded, because I love seeing the spark in the eyes of a 10-year-old girl when she's seen a film about a karate star of Pakistan who looks just like her. And she's like, ooh, I can go home and I can ask that now I want to follow my dreams. And so I think that that's something that is very important to do, because at the end of the day, you can only do good if there's one of you, like this much, but if you can inspire so many others to do good, you can start a movement of people who can create change.
Yes, we're on time. Please, do you have some conclusion words to finish this round, please?
Of wisdom. Off you go.
It's the same message you've been hearing all along. Follow your dreams. Actually, maybe pass on to you. You are here in one of the premier institutions in Latin America, so you have the responsibility, bigger than the average person, to carry also forward the society on your shoulders. And again, this is not the job of the president of Mexico, who's the one responsible for everything. No, it's you, every one of you is responsible, and not just for Mexico. Think of, in bigger terms, think of humanity, no? So in your little thing, actually, maybe I'll finish with this. So I mentioned this yesterday, but there's a beautiful legend from Judaism, from the tradition of ancient stories of that the reason the world goes forward is because there are 36 people in the world, which they call them the tzadikim nistarim, which means the righteous hidden ones. So these are people that we don't know who they are, and they don't know that they themselves belong to this group. And in their work, through their lives, they carry the world forward because of those 36 hidden righteous one. No? So I think that's the spirit. No? That I mean, we're recognized here as leaders in our fields that are working towards for the good of mankind. But I think the real heroes here are the ones that are hidden, and with their work, they actually they contribute to the movement of the world forward. No?
So my parting words is that in your life, if a door has not opened for you, it's because you haven't kicked it hard enough. You need to kick open doors for yourself. No one is going to open those doors for you. You need to make your own destiny, even if no one has ever walked that path. And I know, because I have walked paths that no one I know in my country has been able to. And I know that that's because I have been kicking open doors since I was 17. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't become something or do something, because that just means that there's a door that you haven't kicked yet.